welcome to, I think this was our third KE and Coffee. We are recording the session, so please bear that in mind. The chat function, for those of you familiar with Zoom, will be available throughout the whole session, so please feel free to chat to each other or chat to everyone if you want. We'll look to try and get leave some time for questions towards the end. It is our preference to get you on video and mic, and that's the benefit of being in Zoom meeting. So if you have got a question, then if you use the raise the hand function, hopefully that you are aware of again, then we'll try and pick people from that and get you to ask your question up front. Okay, so that's it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alasdair. I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement with PraxisAuril. Tamsin, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Tamsin Mann, Director of Policy and Communications at PraxisAuril.
Okay, and for this, based on feedback through our online community, we decided that this session would be on place, and fortuitously, CASE, the Campaign for Science and Engineering, released a report called The Power of Place a week or so ago, looking at maximising economic impact of regional R&D investment. The report was gathered from CASE members from across the UK. I understand from looking through it, the work's still ongoing. They've had some roundtables. There's more roundtables and discussions to take place in regions that they haven't already visited. In the report, they summarise the themes that they picked up from across the regions, and they do make a series of policy recommendations around excellence in branding, local leadership, and some more supporting small businesses. The report kind of recognises that this regional growth through R&D is increasingly growing in its political priority, and the report is almost a kind of wish list of how to spend that 22 billion that we might have had. I'm not sure whether we'll still have it going forward, but yeah, it's there as ways that we might help the government wisely invest in it. You know, so my observation, 20 pages, very complex discussion. Tamsin, is that enough, and who's it for?
Well, I think, yeah, so I think the CASE report is one in a long line of place-based analyses, and looking at R&D investment, and also kind of not focusing on uniquely about universities and place, but alluding to some of those roles. And I think you have to bear in mind that CASE is an advocacy organisation, so their audience is the policymaker, the MP, the people making decisions about how to spend that money. So it's a short, simple, and very punchy report that is really delivering key messages to that audience and hiding the complexity of what in policy terms is a very wicked problem, how you level up different parts of the UK, and how you make investments seem to kind of help those places that need it, and not just keep giving more to places that are already doing very well. So it's very well designed for the audience that it intends to reach, and that's something for all of us to learn from, I think, regardless of what the actual content is. Its design is very important as well.
Okay, so if we think about our members, the KE community, and I guess universities in particular, what's the report kind of telling us about, or suggesting that the university's role might be in that agenda?
I mean, I don't think the messages are particularly new. I think how they're presented is quite novel, but it comes back to this point about universities as anchor institutions, which is something that has been talked about for years, and in fact it was a topic that we were meant to address when we went to had we been able to go to Autumn back in February. This was going to be the topic that Sean and I were going to talk about, because of all the existing work that's gone on in this space, not just in the UK of course, but in America and Australia. They were the kind of triangle that we were going to look at. So the role of universities as employers, as places where people acquire skills, as those engines of R&D, both producing research that can be transferred to external businesses and other organisations, but also an attractor of investment from other places. And I think we've just seen this agenda really building and building over the past 5 years in particular, and cemented in the industrial strategy in 2017. And I should say also reflected at a devolved level. The Vision for Wales has got place as a pillar as well. And I assume that conversations in Scotland and Northern Ireland are also looking at a particular geography. So yeah, it's just building on existing research, I think, and the place of universities is becoming more and more important as other types of anchor institution maybe drop away or have been given other priorities.
So that you touched on there the civic role of universities versus I guess the industrial role that the university might play, and I guess there's the potential for tension within those two missions, and there's also this this constant kind of abstraction that government use in treating all universities as kind of the same and doing similar things. So how do you see that? There will be some regions where universities verge more towards a civic agenda, and there's other areas where the universities are very much focused more on the industrial.
That's right, and I think it kind of depends on the heritage that they've got. So we do see that a lot of the post 92s, those kind of former polytechnics have historically have had a much bigger civic role. They tend, if I think about the situation in Cambridge where I am, you've got Anglia Ruskin, which traditionally has had a much more local student base. It's training nurses and quite technical skills for a predominantly local economy. That's changed certainly in the last 5-10 years. But then you've got alongside it, you've got this very internationally renowned university, which is attracting investment because of its reputation. It has a different kind of civic role. Its duty is to, it funds a lot of the museums in the city, things like that the local community can enjoy, and its festivals, which do include Anglia Ruskin now as well. But that's where it opens up and plays that civic role around that kind of knowledge diffusion, I suppose. We might look at Durham as an example of where the university is really trying to build R&D capacity and capabilities because of the industrial heritage that is obviously a real feature of that area, where you've got a CCF, the Northern Accelerator, which is really focusing on attracting investment for companies in that area, trying to keep new spin-outs and startups in that area, and also attract more investment from outside the region, whether that's nationally or internationally. So you've got different missions kind of relating back to heritage. And we talked about, before this meeting, we talked about this rural initiative that's been launched yesterday by Research England and ERC and other partners, which is taking a kind of, I suppose, cross-UK approach to a particular geographic sector, looking at rural economies rather than city economies. So there's so many ways you can cut place that it becomes, you can pick a report that meets whatever your kind of objective is there.
Mm-hmm. So just picking up on this, and I guess the research agenda, this a lot of the institutions focus on certainly REF focuses on this international excellence in research and rewards accordingly, and yet this, for a lot of the regional activity, that international role is almost at odds with local or regional.
Yeah, I mean, impact is tricky, isn't it? And I know there are ARMA members in the room who can probably talk about that with much more authority than I can. I think you have to, when you think about community and public engagement, I think there is an increasing recognition that you have to understand what your community and your publics need and co-create your research with them to maximise the impact. Now, in ref terms, you hope that that impact will be deemed to be of an international standing. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's internationally applied. But, you know, I know Julie Bailey has said this in the past, that something that which may not be a 4-star impact can have significant impact for that community or that person that you know, that place that it happens in. So yeah, so it's the ref impact is tricky where place is concerned, I think, because it's not, the impact isn't always happening where the impact originates. In knowledge exchange terms, you know, we do have that remit for community and public engagement. We've been talking about that in HIFE workshops, and how much HIFE directly funds community and public engagement and how much is just, you know, the remit of the university and is funded through other streams. But you know, it's interesting to think about how public engagement and outreach then brings audiences in and acts as an attractor for bringing other audiences into a university that might lead on to other forms of knowledge exchange. So yeah, it's so multifaceted. I think personally, I think it's a, you know, it's a fascinating topic to think about universities and place. My family is based up in Scarborough, and a few years ago, Coventry University took over the kind of annex of, I think it was Hull and then it was York, or the other way around. They've got a little satellite campus up there. But now you see Coventry University in Scarborough, which is quite, you know, it seems a bit odd, but they, you know, the mission of that Coventry University has up there is very much about local skills. It's about creating local jobs, understanding local community needs. The fact that it's called Coventry University doesn't really matter. And that's an interesting example of how, I suppose, a university role might change. It's not just about the university in its city, it's the university in other places as well, and how it can transcend where it is in a way.
So that the other thing that I got from the report was this this convening power that universities are often tasked with, and I guess that again, it's unfair to say that's the same across all regions, because in some regions the business communities may be much more vocal and empowered to do stuff, compared with other regions where the predominantly SMEs may turn to the university as one of the big you know, economic drivers in the area to help and guide stuff. What you know, is that convening power variation across region again?
Yeah, I think so. And it comes back to this point about anchor institution, and where you've got maybe, you know, an internationally renowned university, typically a Russell Group, very, very research intensive. Is that the only, you know, how do they sit in the region? Do they act as an attractor? If you've got a region that maybe doesn't have that kind of world-class, high research intensity institution, then does that region then lack that kind of attraction for R&D? And I think that's reflected in some of the casework and those metrics that you see about inward investment and business investment. You know, you can kind of point to an area and say, oh yeah, well they've got 2 Russell Group universities in that area, and this area doesn't have any. And you know, I've been increasingly thinking, just over the last week, where I've been kind of going back over some of the place-based reports I've been collecting. Universities are given this anchor institution role, but increasingly it feels like they're being asked to play the role of the regional development agencies that were disbanded in 2010, was it? Something like that. And I know when I worked at Cambridge, the RDA was absolutely a key partner in terms of that facilitation of different kinds of partners across the region, internationally as well as locally, but they definitely played a really big convening role. And I think now that's never quite been replaced. And although some LEPs are undoubtedly good at convening and have created the right kind of partnerships, I think universities are being looked to, because they're kind of a neutral space. They're a forum where, you know, you're allowed to come in regardless of, I suppose, you know, you don't have to pay to come in for starters. You don't, you know, regardless of your credentials in a way, there's this willingness to convene around defining problems and defining solutions, or offering solutions to define problems. So it's, I think the nature of that convening is changing.
I mean, that kind of leads on to the discussion they have around branding of regions, and using that to leverage a region's strength and get external investment. Seems to, again, that the report hints at tension, whether it's within a city or if it's let to let. There definitely feels an underlying note in that report that suggests that if everybody played nicer, then better things might result. It also comments on a potential disconnect between central and local government in terms of what's driving what agenda. And it was interesting. I was reflecting on the work that I did with the Science and Innovation Audit in Central Scotland, and the comment and report saying that these innovation audits didn't really give government the insights they were looking for, and there was a hope that the local industrial strategies might pick that up. But again, we were talking a while back about the loss of the smart specialisation hub, and how that collation of data at a national level and allow you to spot those bright sparks is really missed.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I really enjoyed looking at the Smart Specialisation Hub data, and I think it's a project that, you know, shouldn't be forgotten. And I'm sure there are lots of academic groups using that data. But you tend to get, well, I've been looking a lot recently at City Ready in the West Midlands and the work they're doing around the economic and social impacts of innovation funding in the West Midlands. So that's an example of a very strong kind of data-driven research group there. I think we do lack a bit of that joining up, that roundedness that they've achieved in the West Midlands at a national level, so that we can really understand, you know, if you invest in universities through HIFE and other kinds of state aid that are kind of driving innovation, what other kinds of impacts does it have, and how does that link to urban planning, for example, where you've got, you know, do people want a new science park or a new innovation centre, or do they just want, you know, a big public open space? You know, you've got, when you start kind of delving into place-based universities and question of place, you very quickly get into all sorts of different disciplinary areas, which is really interesting, but it's what makes it so complex. And you know, we know there are particular areas that we usually use as examples of good place-based practice. You know, Lincoln is one where they're very much, you know, part of their place because they are the only university in such a large region. The work that's going down in the southwest Cornwall and the Scilly Isles is really interesting at the moment. And then if you look at, you know, the work that's going on all the way across the Pennines, really, I suppose, you know, thinking about the Yorkshire universities and the Northern Accelerator, and then thinking about North Wales and the Northwest, the work I've been doing with Wylo in Wales, and thinking about how it's not just about defined geographies, it's about how a university or a cluster of universities might define their own geographies. So Bangor working with Liverpool and Cardiff working with Bristol and that cluster. So, you know, I think there's a natural tendency to want to draw lines and talk about, you know, particular places and particular regions, and this area is doing that, but we all know it's much more diffuse than that.
So, I mean, I guess to try and, before we open up for questions or contributions from others, you know, the whole idea of how do you feel universities are best incentivized to engage in this area? There's a lot of it that's expected that universities will pick up and do the right thing, but what's if it's at odds with you know, a certain financial direction, what is it that's going to encourage universities to do this?
I think a lot of it comes down to kind of that civic role. I think, but I suppose also, you know, at the moment, I mean, finances are looking so grim for everybody that there's got to be you know, so you've got to meet the civic duty to kind of look after your kind of doorstep community, but you've got to start thinking about how you're going to get more income in. And actually that's going to come not necessarily from domestic R&D, it is going to come from that international investment. So you have got to have an eye on, you know, that's about research excellence, and that's about reputation. So the tensions are large, I think, but some of it can be done, I suppose, at a lower cost but high value, and some activities might be, you know, high cost, high value. So there's going to be a lot of balancing acts going on, I think, once we're all able to see the future a bit more clearly.
Okay, great. Well, let's see if there's anybody who's desperate to make a contribution from the floor then. So if you're still with us, then if you raise your hand, if you've got a point or a question, preferably for Tamsin, since she's the expert in this,
Well, I can see there's a couple of comments in the chat about excellence, and I think excellence is becoming a bit of a word, a bit like impact. You know, it's quite, one person's excellent is not the same as another person's excellence, and defining excellence at a national level is difficult, because you know you do have to end up having to use metrics like the HEDSI, which uses income as a proxy for impact, or you're looking at the REF metrics, which are using you know, excellence on an international scale, whereas I say, you know, that may not be what matters at a more local scale. So yeah,
I guess one of the things that I noticed in the report when it spoke about SMEs, it certainly said that the majority of interactions between SMEs were local, with their local university. So that I guess that at a very local level is providing provided they can get over the barriers of interaction that are mentioned in the report, then that has definitely got a potential local impact in helping those, I guess, with innovation R&D, but also with skills, and that graduate retention, I think, is quite an important part for a lot of regions.
Definitely. And I think there's a, you know, when a lot of the literature talks about making places sticky, so you don't want to have a university that's providing great skills for students who are just going to leave the region. You need to have a skilled workforce, but you need that workforce to stay in the region if you're really going to change the R&D landscape and the cultural and social landscape as well. Because let's not forget, you know, universities provide, well, as I said, you know, they provide a huge amount of cultural and social capital for a region as well, particularly where they've got museums, and they do a lot of you know, cultural outreach as well as you know, social support. So it's, I mean,
there was a few years back, there was a bit of there was increasing tension between the local town and universities, and UUK did some work to kind of highlight that economic impact, if you want, beyond the, you know, what the university would talk about, but actually, you know, the spillover effects into local economies and what it meant. To try and show people that actually having a university there with a proportion of international students did a massive injection of money.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you know, this morning Cambridge University has announced that it's doing all its lectures online for the next academic year, and you think about the economic consequences of not having that student body in a town like Cambridge. You know, okay, we're Silicon Fen, but the town itself, day to day, is, you know, hugely dependent on tourists and that student population, parents who come and visit their offspring at university, and the money that students spend in the town. So lots of university towns are going to find themselves economically, you know, on the back foot because students can't go back to their campus. So that's a different kind of impact to the one we've been talking about, but it just shows you how important universities are to towns. You know, the employment has been frozen at a lot of institutions at the moment. That has a big impact. That kind of casual labour of servicing, you know, servicing conferences and events and all that kind of stuff. Huge impacts for university towns.
Yeah, I did. I think it must have been a panorama special last night.
Okay.
And they were walking around Cambridge.
Were they? Okay.
To see how quiet it was.
Empty. It's lovely, but it's also slightly spooky.
Okay. We're rapidly running out of time. Any questions or comments from the floor? I could just scroll down and pick someone, Tamsin. Can you do that?
Well, Dan, why don't you say out your, what's Dan been saying?
Yeah, sorry, I just fed in a sort of a question or a comment, really. I'm just thinking about work I've done whilst at universities and more recently that sometimes there's a bit of a mismatch between what universities think local areas, and by local areas I mean residents or businesses locally think about a particular issue, and think of values are important, and what they actually see locally in terms of the reality of people who don't particularly know university very well but walk past it every day, and what they see and feel about the university, and some of the messages that comes out about why the university is important, and how they can really kind of work a little bit more effectively in terms of some of those messages. I particularly think some of the national positioning around universities doesn't always feel like it resonates with people on the ground in local areas, and things need to be a little bit more, the local kind of near me is there's Nottingham sort of Lakeside, which is an arts venue, huge numbers of population, people go to that, but actually a lot of them are people who are kind of middle class, linked to people who work at the university or the hospital. The penetration beyond that is still, I think, somewhat thin at times.
So there was an interesting discussion yesterday in the Hive, Monday in the Hive workshop we were doing around community and public engagement. So we're doing this exercise with Research England at the moment to look at, value chains and things. But somebody made that point about widening participation and the need for universities to still be very active about getting, making sure they're reaching new communities and audiences that won't necessarily think of the university as a place for them. And that can be, even if, as you say, Dana, even if they've lived in a university town all their life, they won't necessarily think that the university is something for them if they haven't been to university or don't know somebody who's worked there, for example, or something. So I think it's, we all, if you've worked in and around universities all your life and you've been to university, it's kind of hard to understand how university wouldn't be a place to go and wouldn't provide a certain cultural role in your life, but that obviously is the case still.
Okay, I think we're we're pretty much out of time, and everybody's got lots of other exciting Zoom calls to get on. So thanks very much, everybody who joined us. Thanks, Tamsin, for your.
Pleasure. No, I think it's one of these topics that could run and run. So it's definitely one we'll keep going with. Yeah,
I think half an hour was ambitious to cover it all.
We'll wrap up that in half an hour.
But so I think we'll continue the discussion on the Praxis online community. There's already, I posted the document up there, so if you're looking to find it, you can either get it on the CASE website or go onto our website into the online discussion, and then we can continue the conversation in there. I think next week we said we might look at novel Hive evaluation.
So these Hive evaluation workshops we've been doing, some PraxisAuril members, some people who are here may have been involved. There's the phase 1 workshops completed just before Christmas, so that report is out now, a mere 100 odd pages if you want to go and read it. So yeah, we will. I'll happily talk about that next week.
All right. Okay.
To the best of my ability.
Right. Thanks again, Tamsin. Thanks everybody for joining us, and hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye.